Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. There's something about the warm smell of roasted turkey, the laughter of family, and the crackling fire that fills me with comfort. This year, though, was different. We set the table as usual, but when I glanced at the dining room, I noticed we'd accidentally set an extra chair. "Who's the extra chair for?" I asked my mom, half joking. She shrugged. "No idea, but leave it. Maybe it's for good luck." Dinner began as normal. Clinking glasses, passing dishes, and the occasional embarrassing family story. But as the meal went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was sitting in that empty chair. My aunt, seated across from it, kept looking over her shoulder as if someone had tapped her. At one point, she even said, "All right, who's doing that?" Nobody owned up to it. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, so faint I thought it was my imagination. I could have sworn I heard my name. "Did you say something?" I asked my cousin. He shook his head, looking confused. The air in the room grew colder. My uncle joked about the firewood running out, but the chill wasn't coming from the fireplace. It was coming from the empty chair. After dinner, I helped clear the table. As I reached for the plate in front of the chair, my hand froze. The plate was clean, almost spotless, but I know I saw food on it earlier. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the chair, the whispers, the cold. Unable to resist, I looked up the history of the house online. It didn't take long to find it. The previous owner had died here, alone, on Thanksgiving. They say he was waiting for his family to arrive, but no one ever came. Now, every Thanksgiving, I feel compelled to set an extra chair. It's not a mistake anymore. It's tradition. And sometimes, when the room gets cold, I think maybe he's finally found his place at the table. It was a cold Thanksgiving evening, and the table was set with all the usual trimmings: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. We were in the middle of our final preparations when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man standing there. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a kind smile and a weathered look, like he'd been on the road for too long. He introduced himself as James and said he was traveling through town but got lost and couldn't find his way to his friend's house. "You're welcome to join us," my mom said before I could even process what was happening. James hesitated, but eventually he stepped inside. "I don't want to impose," he said, but his eyes lit up when he saw the feast. Dinner was lively. James told incredible stories about his travels, places he'd been, people he'd met, and adventures that sounded almost too good to be true. But he was charming, and soon everyone was hanging on his every word. After dinner, James helped clear the table and even thanked my mom for the meal with a slight bow. "You've been so kind," he said. "I'll never forget this." When I woke up the next morning, the house felt strange, quiet, even for the day after Thanksgiving. I went downstairs and froze. The guest room bed was perfectly made, like no one had slept there. The pillow didn't have the dent it should have from his head. His jacket, which I remembered hanging on the coat rack, was gone. When I asked my parents about it, they seemed confused. "Who are you talking about?" Mom asked. There was no James. I thought she was joking until I checked the dining room. All the silverware was accounted for, except for the knife that had belonged to my grandfather, his prized possession. And then I remembered James mentioning a place he visited, a town my grandfather had lived in long ago. The final blow came when I found an old photo in a dusty box in the attic. It was my grandfather, young and smiling, standing next to a man I recognized immediately, James. We never saw him again, but to this day I wonder, was he just a stranger? Or was he someone who had been waiting for an invitation all along? It all started a week before Thanksgiving. My mom and I were at a local yard sale, looking for some cheap holiday decorations, when I spotted it. A beautiful, old cornucopia. It was woven from dark, aged straw and had a certain charm, even though it looked like it had seen better days. "Perfect for the table," Mom said, handing the seller a few dollars. I didn't like it. There was something unsettling about it, but I didn't say anything. We placed the cornucopia in the center of the dining table, filling it with plastic fruit and colorful leaves. It looked nice at first. The first strange thing happened the night before Thanksgiving. I went to grab a glass of water and walked past the dining room. In the dim light, I noticed something odd. The plastic fruit in the cornucopia looked different, wrinkled. When I turned on the light, I froze. The apples were rotting, the grapes were shriveled, and there was a foul, sour smell. Probably just old plastic, Mom said when I told her the next morning. But she couldn't explain why the cornucopia felt heavier when we picked it up to clean underneath. Thanksgiving Day came, and the table was set beautifully. Everyone admired the cornucopia, but I couldn't stop staring at it. Something was wrong. After dinner, while cleaning up, I saw it again, the cornucopia. Only this time, it wasn't fruit inside. Instead, I saw something dark. I reached in hesitantly, my hand shaking. It was a bone, a small, brittle bone. I screamed, and my dad rushed over. "What is it?" he asked, but when he looked inside, he just saw fruit. Normal fruit. Nobody believed me, but I knew what I saw. That night, I woke up to a loud thud from the dining room. I grabbed my phone for light and crept downstairs. The cornucopia was lying on its side. The table scattered with black feathers, dried leaves, and more bones. I didn't even touch it. I ran back upstairs and locked my door. The next morning, the cornucopia was gone. My mom said she threw it out because it was too creepy. But sometimes late at night I still hear that thud, like something heavy falling onto the table. And when I pass by the dining room, I swear I catch a faint whiff of that sour smell. It was supposed to be a perfect Thanksgiving weekend. My friends and I rented a cozy cabin in the mountains to escape the chaos of our families. The cabin was old but charming, with a big wooden table perfect for our feast. We spent the whole day cooking. Turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, you name it. By the time we sat down to eat, we were starving. The food was delicious, and the laughter was nonstop. But halfway through the meal, something strange happened. I was still eating when I realized I wasn't getting full. In fact, I felt even hungrier than before. "This food is amazing," I said, piling more stuffing onto my plate. "Yeah, but I feel like I haven't eaten anything," my friend Sarah said. We all laughed it off and kept eating, but the more we ate, the hungrier we felt. By the end of the meal, our plates were empty, yet our stomachs were growling. "I think we overdid it," joked Mark, but his laugh was nervous. That night, I couldn't sleep. My stomach was cramping with hunger, even though I knew I had eaten more than enough. I went downstairs to grab leftovers, only to find Sarah and Mark already there, devouring cold turkey straight from the fridge. "This is insane," I muttered. "Why are we still hungry?" By morning, we had eaten everything in the cabin. The leftovers, the snacks we brought, even a loaf of stale bread we found in the pantry. But it didn't matter. The hunger wouldn't go away. Desperate, Mark suggested we drive to the nearest town for food, but when we opened the door, the car keys were gone. We searched everywhere, but they were nowhere to be found. The hunger started to change us. Sarah became obsessed with the idea that there was more food hidden somewhere in the cabin. She tore through cupboards, smashing plates and breaking furniture in her search. Then, on the third day, we heard it, a soft, rhythmic, creaking sound from the dining room. We walked in and froze. The table was full again. Turkey, mashed potatoes, everything we'd eaten on Thanksgiving. At first, we were relieved, but as we sat down to eat, I noticed something. The turkey smelled wrong, like it had been left out for days. The mashed potatoes were cold and gluey, but we didn't care. We couldn't stop ourselves from eating. I don't remember how long we stayed in that cabin. Days? Weeks? Time blurred as we ate and ate. Our bodies growing weaker, not stronger. Eventually, the food ran out again. The last thing I remember is Sarah muttering, "We'll find more," as she turned her hungry eyes toward me. When the rescue team found the cabin, all they discovered were scraps of food, broken dishes, and a single empty table. No sign of us. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still smell that rotten turkey. And I wonder if I'm still sitting at that table, trapped in an endless feast I'll never escape. Thanksgiving was always a quiet affair for my family. This year, it was just me, my parents, and my little brother Ryan. We lived in a small house at the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods. It was peaceful, usually. Dinner was ready, and as we sat down to eat, I glanced out the window. That's when I saw him, a man standing just at the edge of the trees. He was tall and dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't moving, just staring. "Mom, there's someone outside," I said, my voice shaking. My dad got up to look, but by the time he reached the window, the man was gone. "You've been watching too many scary movies," he said with a chuckle, but I couldn't shake the image. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man in the yard. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint tapping at the window. I froze. My bed was right next to the window, and I didn't dare move. Tap, tap, tap. Summoning all my courage, I turned my head ever so slightly. The curtains were thin enough for me to see his outline, the man from earlier, standing inches away from me, his face pressed against the glass. I screamed, and my parents rushed in, flipping on the lights. By the time they looked, the window was empty. They didn't believe me. Dad checked outside and found nothing, but I knew what I saw. The next day, as we cleaned up from Thanksgiving, I stayed glued to the windows, watching the backyard. The man didn't come back, at least not while it was light out. That night, I stayed awake, listening for any sound. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the deck. Slow, deliberate. I wanted to wake my parents, but something stopped me. A horrible thought crept into my mind. What if he's already inside? The footsteps stopped, and then I heard the creak of the back door. I locked my bedroom door and stayed up until dawn. When my dad found me the next morning, he asked why the back door was wide open. I didn't answer. We never saw the man again, but I still wonder, what did he want? And why, on Thanksgiving of all nights, did he choose our house? Sometimes, when I'm home alone, I swear I can feel eyes watching me from the woods. And every Thanksgiving I double-check the locks, just in case. We were driving home late on Thanksgiving night, my family and I. The roads were nearly deserted, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last people on earth. My dad was at the wheel, Mom dozing in the passenger seat, while my brother and I sat in the back, half asleep from too much turkey. The fog rolled in thick as we turned onto the old highway. The world outside the car seemed to disappear, swallowed up by the gray. That's when we saw him, a man standing on the side of the road. He was hitchhiking, his thumb out and a tattered bag at his feet. He looked young, maybe mid-20s, and was wearing a thin coat that didn't seem warm enough for the cold night. "Should we pick him up?" Dad asked. Mom stirred awake and shook her head. "It's late. Let's just keep going." But as we passed him, I felt a chill, like the cold from outside had seeped into the car. I glanced back and froze. The man wasn't standing on the road anymore. He was walking, no, running, after the car. "Dad, he's following us," I shouted. Dad laughed nervously. He's probably just cold and desperate for a ride. But the man didn't look desperate. His face was blank, his eyes locked on the car, and he was moving too fast, far faster than anyone should be able to on foot. Dad sped up, and the man disappeared into the fog. We thought that was the end of it, until we turned a corner and saw him again, standing on the side of the road, his thumb out like nothing had happened. "How did he—" Mom didn't finish her sentence. This time, Dad didn't slow down. He kept driving, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. We didn't talk about it, not even when we got home. We just went straight to bed, trying to shake off the unease. But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the driveway, leading from the street right up to our front door. and when I checked my phone, I saw a picture in my photo gallery that I hadn't taken. It was blurry, but I could still make it out. A man, standing in the middle of the road, his thumb out, staring straight at the camera. I deleted the photo, but sometimes, on cold, foggy nights, I swear I see him again. Always on the side of the road, always waiting. Thanksgiving at my aunt's house was always a grand affair. Her dining room could barely contain the massive table she set every year, and this time was no exception. Family from all over came to feast, filling every seat in every corner of the room with chatter and laughter, except one seat. This year, there was a chair at the far end of the table that no one seemed to want to sit in. It wasn't intentional, just one of those things. When the food was served, everyone settled into their usual spots, and that chair stayed empty. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. I was too busy passing dishes and piling my plate high. But as the meal went on, I began to feel off. The air around that empty chair seemed colder, heavier somehow. "Who's the seat for?" I asked my mom, pointing to it. She frowned. "No one. I guess we miscounted." That seemed unlikely, but I let it go, until I noticed something else. Every time someone passed the rolls or poured wine, they avoided that side of the table. Plates were pushed around it like they were steering clear of an invisible barrier. And then there were the noises. A faint creaking, like the chair shifting under someone's weight. The soft clink of a fork against a plate, even though no one was sitting there. I nudged my cousin Ellie, who was sitting closest to it. "Do you hear that?" Her face was pale. "Yeah, I thought it was just me." The noises grew louder as dessert was served. Footsteps on the hardwood floor, even though we were all at the table. A low murmur, like someone speaking just below hearing range. By then, everyone was uneasy. Conversations had dwindled, and most people were picking at their food. And then, the chair moved. It was subtle, just an inch or two, but we all saw it. My aunt tried to laugh it off. "Must be a draft," she said, though her voice was shaky, but it wasn't the wind. Suddenly, the candle at the center of the table flickered violently, and the room plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the chair was pulled all the way out, like someone had gotten up. That was the end of dinner. People started clearing plates and mumbling excuses to leave. Later, as we packed up to go home, I asked my aunt about the chair. Her face darkened. "I didn't want to say anything," she whispered, "but I bought this table at an estate sale. The seller mentioned something about it belonging to a family who didn't leave on good terms. We never used that chair again. In fact, my aunt got rid of the whole table after that Thanksgiving. But sometimes, when I think back to that night, I wonder, did we get rid of the table, or just the guest who came with it?"